Item 46 is to discuss Assembly Bill 386 enacted at the 2015 Nevada legislative session and take any action deemed appropriate.
Commissioner Weekly, this is an item you're requesting.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioners, and thank you, Manager's Office, for allowing us to have this on the agenda here today. I have a whole team that's going to come in and talk about a piece of legislation that went into effect in October. And this is something that I believe affects all of our districts here. And I think that just to be able to put some information on the record here today and maybe get some legal opinion in terms of how do we as a county help move this forward in terms of helping to clean up our neighborhoods as we deal with squatters. And I'm sure that each of us can give testimonies in terms of how we've had to deal with this from a law enforcement standpoint. And we do have a representative here from the Metropolitan Police Department that will also give his perspective on it. He's been very instrumental in helping to push this legislation through, but also to moving forward to try and get more teeth involved, to put realtors out there, and Commissioner Berger, I'm sure you can add to how it feels to have to go and approach a squatter's home and put yourself in harm's way, potentially put yourself in harm's way. This is something that we want to try and alleviate. And so with that being said, Mr. Chair, through you and the Commission, I'd like to have the first part of our team begin with our presentation.
Great, thank you, and good morning, and thank you, Chairman Sisolak, for having us, and members of the Clark County Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to offer our comments, and I also want to thank Commissioner Weekly for having us. Thank you so much. For the record, my name is Scott Beaudry. I'm the current president for the Greater Las Vegas Association of Realtors. AB 386, now known as October 1st as the Squatters' Law. This is a victory for proponents of property rights and law enforcement together. Adequate manpower to properly enforce the new law is key to its success, and here are some few points to note. With the passage of 386 during the 2015 Nevada legislative session, Nevada property owners and law enforcement have more teeth in the new law to evict those who unlawfully occupy a property. Moreover, this law creates a new criminal offense for those who unlawfully break into a home with the intent of residing in it. The objective of this new law is to get squatters out of homes more quickly. The likelihood of a realtor encountering a squatter is higher than the general population facing the same predicament. GLVAR wanted to better utilize the squatters' law, not only for the safety of our community, but also to ensure the personal safety of our 12,000 plus realtor members in Southern Nevada. That's why we've teamed up with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department to put together all the necessary information in a single packet to aid law enforcement in more effectively combating squatters. I actually have copies right here that I would love for you guys to have of this packet. Thank you. We realize that Metro is already overburdened, but without a dedicated team of officers to tackle this issue, I'm afraid that AB 386 would fall short in eliminating the squatters that are currently plaguing our community. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you, and I urge the Commission to aid in the safety of our community and assist Metro in the resources they need to enforce AB 386. And personally speaking, as a real estate broker of 120 realtors, I've had in the last 6 to 8 months numerous calls from my agents expressing their fear that they've actually walked up to a property that they thought was vacant, and they walk up to the door to go into the property to find out somebody's actually residing in the property unlawfully. And I get that call immediately. My job as a broker is to help them in their business, to make sure they're doing the right things. But now, with the squatter epidemic that we have, now I'm looking out for their personal safety. And I urge you to work with Metro and help them help us. And we also have Mr. Dave Sanders, our legal counsel, here to help with any questions. And I'd like to pass it on to Lieutenant Farisi from Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And I'll be here to answer any of your questions also.
Good morning, Lieutenant Nick Farisi, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, Northwest Area Command, and I thank you for the few minutes to go through a presentation here. So, traditionally, the background, before this legislative session, we have not had a law in the books that has helped us as a police department. Traditionally, my 15 years here at Metro and how we teach everybody in law enforcement, police stay out of civil matters. We refer them to the constable's office, we refer them to the county courts, civil matters are handled that way. Police don't get involved with that. With the downturn of the economy, we quickly realized that the criminal found a loophole and they got into it, and it was a gray area that we weren't used to, and we didn't have a law in the books that we could effectively provide that customer service. That is how this bill came to pass. We were using trespass or lodging without an owner's consent, but that was a misdemeanor. At most times, we could only give them a ticket, and they were out before the ink even dried on the paper. It was the team that works for me at the Northwest Area Command Community-Oriented Policing that went up with our with our government entity to Carson City to testify and was instrumental in getting this bill passed. And that is what we have today. It went into effect October 1st. With that, like the previous law, like I said, the onus was on the squatters prior to this law, and the landlord or the owner had to go through the burden of going down to the courts and playing those games, and the media has actually covered this extensively with some people. With this new law now, it actually puts the power into the actual owner and not onto the squatter, and the squatter now has the burden to prove that they were a victim and not a criminal. I'm going to run through some numbers with the caveat here that prior to October 1st, these are rough estimate of numbers of calls for service throughout the valley. And what I'd like to illustrate to the commission here is that this is a valley-wide problem, and it's not unique to just one area within the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department district. It's affecting all of the valley. These numbers are conservative estimates because prior to October 1st, there wasn't an NRS that we could track with a crime report. So we've used these using keyword searches through our computer-aided dispatching for calls for service involving squatters. In 2013, as you can see, we had roughly 2,200 incidents. By 2014, we had an estimated 26.5% increase in calls for service of people squatting, bringing us over 3,000 events. And 2015, we just closed out, we saw a 43.3% increase in calls for service relating to squatters with 4,458. This is a map of the valley, Northwest Area Command. Northwest Area Command pretty much starts at Charleston and heads all the way north to Mount Charleston. We service over 330,000 residents. And this is just using our crime view map of cops on dots that I like to call for calls for service for squatters. And what's interesting as we move forward in the presentation and what we saw over the last couple of years in investigating this is that squatting is a gateway to other crimes. And when we track other crimes within an area command or within the valley, usually the nucleus of that crime and that heat map surrounds squatter calls for service and squatter houses. We've had homicides in squatter houses. We've investigated squatter houses that have been chop shops and burglary shops and meth labs and a whole gamut of crimes on top of just the actual crime of squatting. So this is Northwest Area Command in 2013, 460 calls just within the Northwest Area Command. This is Northwest, 706 calls in 2014, so you can see how where it's concentrating, and these numbers are consistent with our violent crime and our hotspot areas for within Northwest Area Command. This is the valley, and this depicts 2013, 2014, and 2015 for calls for service. Now understand that you could have multiple calls on the same house. You could have a concerned neighbor, a concerned citizen. You could also have an absentee owner or a realtor or a bank as they go through the foreclosure process. But these are just the volume of calls that we're dealing with this particular crime. By map, I'd like to break this down just so that every commissioner can kind of understand where this affects them. So you have Northwest Area Command calls for service, which I explained those boundaries. BAC is our Bolden Area Command, which is our traditional downtown Martin Luther King and the President and Alphabet Streets, historic West Las Vegas. You have Downtown Area Command calls for service, which is our Fremont Street corridor downtown. South Central Area Command calls for service. That's out off of Silverado Ranch area, out in that area, and also a limited area around UNLV. EAC is our Enterprise Area Command, which predominantly involves Mountains Edge and Southern Highlands. Convention Center Area Command is our Strip. One thing I'd like to point out there, why you see the decrease is we redid our boundaries for Convention Center Area Command after 2013. and they lost a little bit of a residential section that went to South Central. So that's why you see the decrease there, and Convention Center Area Command just has our strip corridor right now. Northeast Area Command calls for service. Northeast is our area predominantly around Nellis Air Force Base. And then Southeast Area Command is our Boulder Highway Corridor and the Pecos Tropicana major intersection. This is an overlay of burglaries, robberies, and stolen vehicles and a heat map as it relates to calls for service for squatters. And as you can see in the heat map there, where with the yellow and the red, there's a high concentration of calls for service for squatters. So we can show a direct correlation between vacant houses, squatters, and crime in that neighborhood. Now, this goes on top of just reducing the quality of life and the deterioration of a neighborhood if a squatter comes in. Because let's be honest, a squatter that's going in is not going in there to beautify the neighborhood and make that community better. They're squatting in this situation as a hub to live for free and to further their criminal enterprises is what we are seeing. This is an overlay of squatters out in the Enterprise Area Command as it relates to burglaries, robberies, and stolen vehicles. And again, you can see within the heat map, there's a high concentration of calls for service relating to squatters. This is Northeast out by Nellis Air Force Base, and again, it's consistent with our heat map for street crime and violent crime and squatters. Now, what is a squatter? A squatter is somebody that has an intent to assume the occupancy of a third party's home without ever forming or attempting to form a bona fide landlord-tenant relationship. I'm not talking about your rundown house that's all boarded up and isn't even within code to be habitable, and you have a homeless person that just goes in there to get out of the heat or get out of the elements for the night. Those are few and far between, and in that case, they wouldn't necessarily qualify as a bona fide squatter. What I'm talking about is people that go into a home that was once lived in and for whatever reason is now vacant, whether the people walked away due to being upside down or they were foreclosed on, but the bank has not accepted ownership of that house, and it's a house that is ready to go in a neighborhood that could be right next door to any one of us in this room today. A squatter is not a prior tenant. It's very important with this new law that we don't do away or gray up the area of the landlord-tenant laws to begin with. So if somebody owns a house and is having a problem with a problem renter, that would not fall under the category of a squatter. That would still fall under the current landlord-tenant laws. It's basically any person that has a legal basis to be there is not going to be considered a squatter. But when we do get a call for a squatter, it is on us as the police department to do that investigation to make sure that it's not a civil matter and is a criminal matter. And we also cover a genuine victim of fraud. Now, I understand that there are a small percentage within the valley of people that might have answered an ad on Craigslist or answered an ad in person to rent a house and felt that they were legally renting that house. In my year in this position and in the 3 to 4 years that my team has been doing this at Northwest, we haven't seen one yet. So I'm not going to say that they're not out there, but that percentage is very small. With that percentage, though, we are prepared if we do come in contact with somebody that was a victim of fraud. And one of our partnerships with the Greater Las Vegas Association of Realtors and with the banks is to ensure that we're not putting a family out on the street that was a victim of fraud themselves. And in that case, in addition to the squatter law, we would actually open up a fraud investigation for those people on their behalf. We talked about Assembly Bill 386. It went into effect October 1st. It was written jointly between LVMPD, the Justice Court Evictions, and we also work in unison with the Constable's Office, which is now part of the Sheriff's Civil Division with Captain Forbes over at the jail. It basically gives us 3 crimes: housebreaking, unlawful occupancy, and reentry. Housebreaking is if we can actually prove that that person is the one that kicked in the door, cut the lock, and went in and took the house. Unlawful occupancy is just being in the house unlawfully, and reentry after civil lockout is after we take enforcement of a squatter and the 21-day notice is posted. Anybody that goes in after the fact would be reentry after civil lockout. It defines a dwelling. It's important to note that a dwelling, this is not for commercial property. This isn't for storage units or vacant shopping centers. This is strictly for a residence that's designed to be occupied as a residence or place to sleep. Breaks down the elements. So for housebreaking, your first offense is a gross misdemeanor and your second offense is a felony. That's important for us as the police department because like Commissioner Weekly said, we were looking for something that we could sink our teeth into, and by having a gross misdemeanor on a first offense, it really gives us an avenue to try to deter this crime and hopefully have it rid itself in the next couple of years. A success story that we had since October 1st, we've done roughly, my team, about 14 of these. We recently went to court last month, and the person received 6 months in a Clark County Detention Center, along with 1 year of supervised probation. So with the law and with the penalties, it's actually giving us a little bit more to get punishment on the back end through the courts. And then the second offense is a felony. Now, this is regardless of conviction. After one arrest, the second arrest will be able to charge for a felony. Unlawful occupancy, which is most of the time what, unfortunately, we're going to be able to charge with just because of investigations. If they're convicted of 3 or more times, then the next time it's a felony, but those first 3 would be gross misdemeanors. And then the unlawful re-entry, property from the person pursuant to Section 2 or 3, police have to make an arrest for this to be enacted. So what we realize at the police department is our biggest consumer, so to speak, or customer, is going to be a real estate agent. Typically, we have 3 types of people that report squatters to us. It's either an owner themselves that represents themselves, they're renting out a house, or they're an out-of-state owner and they come back and find out that their house is been occupied illegally. You get a concerned citizen neighbor that knows that the house is vacant or knows that people that shouldn't be living in there move in. But most likely, it's through the foreclosure process that the banks take custody of a home and then put it back on the market and hire a property manager, i.e. realtor, to represent it. They go out there to market it, to put it on the market, and they find that somebody is living in there. And what it was important for us is for their safety, like it was already alluded to, but then also being able to provide the customer service that we can with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. So in partnering with GLVAR, we came up with a checklist and packet of what we need from them to open up an investigation. And the model that I used was similar to an identity theft investigation. We can't just open up an investigation about identity theft without the proper documentation, knowing truly who our victim is, whether it's going to be a bank, whether it's going to be the actual person, and then the supporting documentation that we need, credit reports, etc. We modeled it after that, so we gave them a checklist and a packet of what we would need off the assessor's site and the clerk's site, because it's important because those 2 sites are different and one is more accurate as far as legal terms go than the other and is updated more recently. But then also we need to know who the victim is. And in this case, we provided them through their attorney with a power of attorney form where Bank of America or Wells Fargo is the owner, but they have hired a particular realtor. They give them power of attorney to act on their behalf. They come and do a station report, so they're not calling 311, 911 and not taking away our patrol officers that are already patrolling the community. They come into their area command to do this report for squatting. They provide this packet to us, and then a detective will come, grab that packet, research it, do some back checking, and then we actually schedule an appointment with them when we're ready to take enforcement action on that house, so that when we're there, representatives of the house are there, so that when we take our enforcement action, we can turn the house over to that realtor or that bank on that same day. These are just samples of the forms that are in the packets that were given to the commission. This shows the owner's authorization, that basically it's big for us because in the police world, without a victim, we do not have a crime. So by them completing this form, we know who exactly is our victim. And then we provide them with copies of our voluntary statement of what we need, along with the checklist and a 21-day notice. And with that, if there's nothing else, I can open it up for questions.
Thank you. Is that the last speaker, or you have more?
That would be it.
Okay. So I'll start with questions down here. Commissioner, start with Kirkpatrick and come right down this way. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And,
Excuse me, we're not at public comment yet.
you know, I think there's a lot of people that got left off the list of who worked pretty hard to get this bill passed, because if you all will remember that it almost died 6 times, right? So, Brian O'Callahan spent, I believe he was with us at 1 a.m. trying to get it passed. Let's not forget the legislators. Edgar Flores, who was a freshman, got the most contentious bill of the session. And to her credit, Victoria Seaman, working across the aisles to get things done. And it wasn't, and quite frankly, it doesn't go far enough. But it was the compromise that we could get for Southern Nevada to even start to get the issue, right? Because Northern Nevada didn't believe that it could possibly exist. And quite frankly, there were a lot of business folks who didn't think that we should be in the business of getting involved. So tend to get frustrated at times when people who spent many hours and did a lot of the work don't get recognized because it doesn't get done in a vacuum. Everybody had to come together. To this day, it still doesn't go far enough because at the end of the day, we never addressed the people that come in with the phony loans. We never addressed that process, that have the paperwork that showed, and I've worked with Metro several sting operations trying to get people who rent on Craigslist to folks because then they become squatters at no fault of their own. So we did not get to address that. So while this is great and fluffy and a good start, I hope that you'll go back next legislative session and continue to address the rest of it because this is one piece of it. In North Las Vegas, 4 out of 5 homes were in foreclosure. That's why people came together to discuss because with squatters that were coming and going every single day. Changing the locks very quickly. People ask why was that put in there, and it was because they were changing the locks as fast as we could get them in and out. In North Las Vegas, they have been super successful, so I would hope that you all could collaborate at some time to come back and see what needs to continue to be fixed, because what was a problem that they were seeing every single day, they have now got it under control, and people are able to know who's there. And there is some responsibility of the homeowner, which we had to remind folks that you can't just leave for 6 months and go back to your other state and not check on it because it makes it harder for everybody else to do their work. So, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Rocky and Jenny, who were there late into the wee hours as well. So I just want to make sure that people get their credit that they worked on. And honestly, this is a start, but there's a lot of work to be done because in a transient type state, we're going to see this more often than not. So I don't have a question, and it's a very long comment, but super passionate about this issue because it was crazy to have to fight for something that could do so much good with people who thought regulation was bad, right?
Yes, ma'am. And just so you know, we do partner with North Las Vegas. We just met with them last month, and one of the items on the agenda was start listing out our wish list, so to speak, for the 2017 legislative session, because there are many things. There are still a few loopholes in there, but it's a start.
David Sanders, General Counsel for the Greater Las Vegas Association Records for the Realtors. For the record, we're actually meeting with the City of North Las Vegas next week. We are in discussions with the Henderson Police Department. The idea for the Realtors is to have a competent, similar packet for every law enforcement entity in Southern Nevada, so that the Realtors can go to Transaction Desk, which is our online document provider, prepare all the documents, and then turn those into the appropriate law enforcement. And so that is our end goal for that.
Okay, Commissioner Giuliani.
Thank you. You don't need to still be standing there unless I have a question, but, so who did represent the Realtors up there? Was it Rocky?
You're correct, Rocky and his team.
Okay. And Brian O'Callahan's my constituent, so I'm glad she called that out. I actually followed this because Edgar, I was working on some language myself for an ordinance potentially down here, and had worked with him back and forth during the session to add some language to it because I had quite a few squatters, and commissioners do call them in as well as our code people. That said, what I don't want to see is an overly cumbersome bureaucratic approach to doing something that could be simple. So I'm hoping, I know you have to comply with certain things within the statute, the notification and so on and so forth. My understanding is North Las Vegas actually put together a really good task force, and they're turning around things within 16 hours. So why don't we look at that model or us maybe as the county, and bring that back to take a look at how we can do it. I just don't want, I understand you need to train your realtors, we need to train our code enforcement officers, Metro as well, but a lot of the trespass language was not being utilized by Metro when I think they could have probably cited people, and I understand the civil versus criminal, but to me, when I got the purple-haired guy out of or pink-haired guy out of my constituent's house, it was, I will be back to pick you up. He was holding garage sales, for God's sake. He had changed all the locks on everything. I just want to make sure that whatever the law allows, and there's tweaks that need to be made, let's not make it more cumbersome. So hopefully through the task force, but if North Las Vegas, if I could ask the county manager to take a look at that. Part of your document doesn't deal with people that are out of town. They have to come up to Metro to do it. I have a lot of property owners, I don't think I'm the only one, where the residents, the owners of the property actually don't live within the state. So how are they going to be accommodated? Because it says they have to go down to the area command in order to file the report.
If I may, the statute requires either the owner or an owner's representative.
Use the mic.
The statute requires the owner or the owner's representative are the only two entities that are authorized to
Now
contact
talking to the
Metro.
mic.
So they
So-
could have,
You gotta lower the mic down.
Yeah.
There you go, okay.
That's a short
There you
joke in
go.
front of the commissioners. Fantastic. The statute only requires owners and owners' representatives. So one of the documents that we prepared as the Realtors, in conjunction with Metro, is an owner authorization form, so that the Realtors can go out and get that, rather than providing, for example, a listing agreement or a property management agreement. It's a one-page form executed under the penalty of perjury that both myself and Metro's internal legal felt was sufficient to reach the statute.
okay, so I think, I understand that the law allowed for a representative, but how does someone know that? And the banks are some of our worst partners, so to speak, in this, because they don't care if somebody's squatting in somebody's house. I've had more calls on that, so where do they come into play?
That certainly is an issue with the way that the statute is written. With the laws we currently have, the best solution we could come up with was an owner representative. We're
Well,
educating.
we have a crime-free ordinance in the county, and the city of Las Vegas has one, and I think, did North Las Vegas do one, Susan, do you remember? I think they did, whereby they have to pay in to create a database, so they're required by our ordinance to have a property management company on site. So there's something that we can go after the banks on.
Certainly. We're actually recommending to our Realtors that do work with banks or absentee owners to execute that owner authorization form now before it becomes a problem, so that when they do discover a squatter, there's no delay and they can reach out to
So
Metro.
to Metro, do they have to, if I want to file my own complaint on a squatter, do I have to use their form, or is there a different document that's available, or?
If you're the actual owner victim, then we wouldn't need that. All we would need is the voluntary statement. And we have worked with out-of-state victims before. It's not ideal. We like that face-to-face because there's always some gray areas there, and there's a little educating of the public and owners. And we've had some calls, especially from out-of-state, that wasn't a squatter issue.
Can
It
our
was more
code
landlord-tenant.
enforcement also, I mean, I'm just trying to find out so that if we train people on what they need to do, that we've got the flexibility to accommodate.
Yes,
Not
ma'am.
everybody's a Realtor with no disrespect, so you have a variety of different individuals that would be there. So I want to know what Metro will accept or not accept. So maybe that's something that you can come back or send us an email about what happens there. I know I brought up a discussion item, and we have a committee, I think we're going to have a meeting coming up, because we were talking about requiring leases for single property residences to be notarized. Possibly, I talked with Metro about that a couple of years ago, and they thought that might help them. But and that may be something we're going to still meet on to talk about. But one thing I didn't realize is the utilities, let people go online and turn on their utilities without proof that they are an owner. And so I reached out to NV Energy. I need to get with Southwest Gas, but we're going to bring them into the table as we have this discussion to say, you need to change your internal policy. That creates additional problems. If somebody can just go online and say, I'm at 2462 Maryland Parkway, and turn on my power, because then that legitimizes them and it makes the process more cumbersome. So hopefully you can help with that part of it, with that side of it too. So it's a good start. I just want to make sure we're not making it overly cumbersome, and that as we're all on the same page, that we all have the same information. So I'm hoping that you take a look at the North Las Vegas thing, but I would ask Sabra, or through the chair, that we take a look at what they've come up with to see how we can implement it quicker. Thank you.
Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Realtors and Lieutenant. Couple just basic questions so I make sure I understand. When you said the occupancy, I'm assuming it's mostly single-family homes, but would apartments or townhomes fall under this?
Yes, sir.
And then the absentee owner, under a scenario where they can't be found, which once in a while we hear about not being able to track down the true ownership, is there a mechanism to then bypass if we can't locate that person?
That is one of the challenges with the current law, and as Commissioner Kirkpatrick said, it's not perfect. There's still more work to be done. In those situations, sometimes our hands are tied, and we have the best avenue for the realtors or whoever would be to use the civil eviction process that's on the books right now, rather than going on the criminal if we can't determine who the actual owner is.
And then another specific scenario would be, you talked about if the owner, at least of record, is foreclosed. There's been incidents that then they lease or get someone to come in while they're being chased somewhere else. And that's the innocent victim I think you talked about. Do you still have the ability to relocate that individual or family? Or because of the innocent victim, would they be allowed to stay there? And that may be discretionary, but
In the situation you've described where there's a person that's in the property and the owner is foreclosed, there's actual case law in federal law that protects the tenant in that scenario. If there is the situation where you have an innocent victim, from our discussion as the realtors and also our knowledge with the banks, we're more than willing to work with them. The purpose of this statute seemed to be more the actual criminal element that we're taking advantage of the number of vacant homes in the valley.
okay, thank you. And so I understood that correctly. If there's a repeat offender, if it crosses jurisdictional lines, does the infraction in Metro's jurisdiction carry over if they're caught in North Las Vegas, Henderson?
Yes, sir. This is a Nevada revised statute,
Okay, so-
so it's throughout the whole state.
Final question is, what do we do at the county? What can we do? Code enforcement, does this give them a new avenue to pursue, or do we have to do anything? That would be to our guys.
Well, I'll start the response and then,
I got Mr. Burnett, Rocky, then I'll go to you, I guess. Go ahead. I'm going to take Don first and then you.
I'll make
Okay.
my comment even briefer then. I'll defer to Sabre, but obviously we have a new tool that wasn't previously available, and as you know, as Commissioner June Kiliani, I believe, pointed out, that we've had lots of experiences in this area, primarily through code enforcement. We have the ability to handle these situations differently, and we will. So I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Sabre.
Commissioners, for the record, Sabre Smith Newby. I have been in contact with Chief Allswing, and we do have a number of squatter situations within Clark County, within the code enforcement realm. Typically, because we are not peace officers as code enforcement officers, we are limited in what we can do. The most common citation that we write for this is dwelling without utilities, which is a violation in our Chapter 22, or rather Title 22. We also work very closely with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department in those situations now that the bill has passed, in order for them to be able to do the criminal penalties. We also follow up with other citations as necessary. Many of those you're already familiar with, like they would be on any other property, outside storage, trash and debris, and those sorts of things. Unfortunately, many of those citations go toward the owner, who may or may not be aware that this is going on the property, because the squatter has turned up without their knowledge.
And I've just got, is there some way, I'm sorry, Rocky, did you want to respond? No? Did you?
Not directly to that. For the record, Joe Locatelli of Carrera, Nevada, representing the Greater Las Vegas Association of Realtors. Just wanted to point out a couple of things for our purpose here, actually being here to get today, is just to inform you of our collaborative effort working with the Metropolitan Police Department. And you've seen by Lieutenant Freezy's presentation the urgency, but probably for future commission meetings, it is a manpower issue, and as far as law enforcement being able to effectively enforce this, it's a good start. As Commissioner Kirkpatrick pointed out, this law But to properly enforce it, there's going to have to probably be conversations in the future about more specific manpower for the Metropolitan Police Department. So I just wanted to add that.
Okay. Do we have a way to break down this issue that was brought up about the Craigslist, somebody responding to lease and thinking that they're okay versus somebody that's just breaking in? Or how many of those, so 4,000, that number is staggering. It's just staggering. How many, is there a way to quantify that?
Commissioner, what I can tell you today is we have not found a true victim that has been taken advantage of. And I'm not going to say that they're not out there. In our enforcement since 2011, 2012, doing this even prior to this law being in effect until this point, we have yet to find a true victim that was taken advantage of. We have criminals that try to play that route, but through interviews, interrogations, and other investigative means, we're roughly right now 90% confession rate when we do enforcement action, getting a full confession that they were squatter and that they knew they were squatting. And that 10% that we do not get a full confession, the prima facie evidence is staggering. Our officers that are investigating these crimes are very well versed in leases and being able to poke holes in leases. Anybody can go on the internet and type up a lease, but you have to have a little bit of knowledge of the property and some other things that go into the lease. And usually during our interview, we can poke holes in those leases to overcome the reasonable person standard. Is it reasonable that you go to a gas station and a guy that you don't know their name and you pay them $1,500 cash once a month and you don't get a receipt or anything like that? Just to give you one small example. But we haven't come in contact with that, but we're prepared for it in partnering with the Greater Las Vegas Association of Realtors and in some other collaborative meetings that we've had with some of the banks. Mainly Wells Fargo has been a good partner, and then reaching out to other stakeholders in the community, our victim services. We're prepared if we do come across that family that they will not be put out on the street in the heat or the cold.
Now, let me add to that. Absolutely, Lieutenant's correct. The criminals out there who are squatters will play the victim card with us upon approaching the property right off the bat. And we have no way of knowing whether they are victims or criminals. That's why our partnership with Metro is so important. It goes hand in hand. We have to have them work with us and the manpower to work with us to eliminate this issue.
Okay. No, this isn't a public. Okay, I'm still taking commissioner comments here. If a commissioner has a question, otherwise
Have a seat.
Commissioner Giuliani, Commissioner Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I want to know, because a lot of this revolves around education, people knowing what they can do, where that resource starts. So first and foremost, they can call 211, and they'll direct them to, at least the state will direct them down to you. So what are we doing? And I know there's a town hall meeting that Metro is having on, I think it's January 27th, the Northwest Command is having. So what are you doing, and what are the realtors doing to educate the memberships as well as the neighbors that, you know, there's 5 ways that you look, that you even know that it could possibly be a squatter within the neighborhood, right? They're moving in at odd times and they're doing different things. So through our neighborhood watch programs, is this coming up? Because I'll be honest, I haven't seen any education for the general public as a whole. So what are we doing in that case to let them know that this is a route? And for the realtors, what are you all doing to let your realtors know how this process moves? Because, you know, you can pass all the laws in the world and you can write all the ordinances, but until you educate the general public, it does no good.
No, I agree. We have, this is again a very important issue with us. So we are actively educating our members through any means possible. Lieutenant has actually gone to numerous offices. He spoke in front of our membership. We have material going out on a weekly basis, letting our members know how important this issue is and how to stay safe, and letting them know of our partnership with Metro. So we're doing any means possible to let our membership know that we are working with Metro, this is an issue, and to be safe.
And on the Metropolitan Police Department, I know 2 months ago it was on a first Tuesday agenda to talk about the new law, and it went into effect. We're still getting our grasp on this new law, working out the kinks. We trained our department. A good percentage of them are community-oriented policing teams and our detectives within the area command that right now are predominantly responsible for these investigations. And there's still more training to come out because we're still running into areas where the patrol officer showing up on the street still isn't very well versed on this law and is giving bad information. So it is something we're aware of and we're on top of it. And the first quarter of this year, we plan on rolling out more training as we finalize our policy and procedure for how we're going to proceed with investigating this crime.
Commissioner Scott.
I was just wondering, are the other commands as involved? Are you helping to train the other commands with what you're learning?
Yes, ma'am. So when this law came into effect, Northwest by de facto became the resident experts within the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, mainly because we were the ones that were mostly affected with the downturn of the economy and vacant houses and seeing squatters, and our COP team was instrumental in working with everybody else in government in getting this law passed. So we have trained every area command. They were responsible for sending members from their community-oriented policing team as well as their detectives to training. It was a 4-hour block of instruction educating them on this law and the steps and procedures for opening an investigation, and we will be rolling it out even further to the entire department as we move forward with more solid policy and procedures.
Thank you. It's really impressive work. Nice to know that it's happening because we do see this as a real issue in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Barring any further questions, oh, Commissioner Breger.
Hi, is this document online for realtors?
Only for realtors, yes it is.
Really? I'm usually pretty on top of things. I have not seen
I guess, Mr. Burnett, if we could just stay in the loop in terms of what's going on as it relates to both Metro and the Realtors on this, or if there's suggestions.
There's some, yeah, I was gonna say our website, but I know that Sabra was working on it back in September to put together, to see if there's ordinance changes that we need to make. So that may be something that staff brings back to us as well, if we have to tighten anything up there. And know she and Jason hopefully are working on that.
And insofar that we are also a source of intake, if you will, we'll make sure that our staff gets better trained and we integrate into the operations that were outlined today.
Yeah, and if there is a little snippet or an article that somebody's written, we can put it in the newsletters. We got enough newsletters up here. The county's got a big one, and, you know, we could.
We would be more than, as the Greater Las Vegas Association of Realtors, help you write the article and
That'd be
give
great.
it to you guys.
If you can get us something over, that'd be terrific.
Not a problem.
Okay, and Commissioner Weekly.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Chair and Ms. Manager, for allowing me to put this on the agenda. I thank you so very much, Lieutenant Freezy and Dave and all of you guys. Joe, thank you very much for the information. Pretty much, you know, the chair asked me, what do we want from this? What is it that we're looking for from the commission? Pretty much nothing, except just to be educated on where do we go from here in terms of, you know, you got the bill passed, and I didn't know that you were going to have to bring an Academy Award of thank you list today for all those who worked on this, but that's for another talk show. But at any rate, I think it's so important that we all try to do something. I mean, we're representing the city of North Las Vegas in my district as well. I've had an opportunity to work with not only some of the elected officials, but staff over there in terms of what they're doing. That's what you all are trying to do. And I think just some of the comments that you heard here today are things that you guys can take back and build on and put a better document here together to help us in Clark County, because this is not a new conversation we've had. We've been talking about foreclosure issues in our districts forever. We've been talking about squatter issues in our district forever. And so for some of these folks sitting up here with all the answers, maybe they can send you some more things that you can add on to what you already have, that we can put not only on our websites, but to help better your packet that you have. But I appreciate, and Lieutenant Farisi, I don't want you to walk away from here feeling discouraged or that the work that you guys have been trying to put forth has gone in vain. I think it's great that something's being done. Our problem is that we're too busy working in our own silos and we don't share enough information with each other. So that was the whole point of this informational item here today. and I appreciate you allowing us to put this on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.